All right, so again, what we just did, and I'm going to remove this and do it all over again. Okay? Yeah, I can't do that because I've already got it open. So let me close it. There. All right, so what we did again was we went to our payroll 2. I said this probably is a faster way of doing it. Do a Control-C, Control-V on that, which is going to make a copy. Payroll 2 copy is a crummy name. So I'm just going to change it to 2A, 2B. It doesn't matter. But the only name I'm changing is that outer name. Every single thing else in the program, everything, is exactly the same as this program. Everything. There's not a problem at all doing that. All right? So I'm going to double-click on this and double-click on the solution file to get started. So again, what we have up here, all right, again, is the same program that we did. Now, I'm going to have you add some stuff. Some of this stuff that you add, you might find confusing. I'm actually going ahead a little bit, and we're going to do some stuff we haven't really talked about yet. You might say, well, that's great. What the hell are you doing that for? I'm doing that because sometimes it makes more sense to see it in practice and then go over it. I mean, if I just go over terms that are in a book, you might find that confusing. If you're actually writing code that are implementing those terms, that may make a hell of a lot more sense. So I'd rather do it that way. Okay? When you take your test, and there is a test in here on Friday, all right, that test is only on chapters 1 and 2. My guess is, and it's not a contest, but my guess is there will be at least one or more people in this room that will probably finish this test in 15 minutes to a half an hour. There's other people that might need a lot more time, and it's okay. I'd rather have you take all 4 frickin' hours if you need it and do a good job on it. But the only stuff that we're going to cover is stuff that's in chapter 1 and in chapter 2. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. If it does turn out, let's just pretend for a second that by 10 o'clock everybody's done. Again, if you're not, it's fine, but let's pretend it's 10 o'clock Friday, everybody's done with the test. Then I'll start on that next chapter. All right, whatever the next chapter is, we'll do that. All right. My hope is by this time, by a week from Monday, which is the 29th, we're going to have, I guess by a week from Tuesday, we are going to go, we'll be through the first 6 chapters of the book. Then we slow it way the heck down. Really slow it down. We're going to spend basically a week per chapter. So the next about 8 weeks, well, this week we'll do chapter 7. Then we'll have a week of chapter 8. Then we'll have a week of chapter 9, etc. So we'll write some programs as a class, and you'll get some homework. Does all that make sense? Because you haven't had any lab time yet. You are going to get some lab time. All right, we'll talk about that after we get done today. All right. So I'm right here, and that's where you should be. Now, you don't have to do this, but I'm going to write a fairly big comment here so you have some kind of an idea what the heck this particular program is supposed to be doing. All right? So again, I ask that you write some comments. This is typically called a program prologue. All right, so you'd put it at the beginning of the program. All right. Now, we've used that comment before, but I'm going to add to it now. I'm going to add 2 more paragraphs. And mercifully, that's it. I mentioned yesterday that you typically write, there's 2 reasons that you write comments. You write them for you in the future, so when you do things and you go back and look at it, you understand what you did and hopefully why you did it, and if anybody else is going to end up maintaining your program. Again, you know, some of you, this is your first class. With most of you, it's your second class, but I want you to understand. Let me tell you real quick. When I got my first job as a programmer, all right, and maybe you've heard me say this already, I don't know, but when I got my first job as a programmer, I got hired, and I was there. I went to meetings pretty much for the first week to get acclimated to their system, etc. And then my boss came in, put his arm around me, which was not him if you knew the guy, and he said, "I've got a really good opportunity for you." I should have ran when he said that, but I didn't, okay? And I said, "Okay, what is it?" And he goes, "I'm going to let you maintain somebody else's code." That's always hard to do because other people, if I give you a problem and I ask you to solve it, if I gave it to Matthew and I gave it to Tony, they may both get it right, but they may solve it in a totally different way. All right? And if I say, "Okay, there's some flaws in your algorithm there, Matthew, but I have Tony fix it," or vice versa, they may not like that because you're doing someone else's work. But the reason I'm telling you that is if you end up writing code that someone else maintains and you've written no comments, they may totally not understand what you did. So they may become your new best friend and park their butts in front of your office all the time to ask you questions. You'll get sick of it real fast because I've been on both ends of that. I've been where I've had to sit there and bug people, and I've been bugged. All right? So this says it's a console program. So again, when we run this, it's running it from the command line. That should make sense to all of you. All right? We're not hard coding the variables in. So each time, if we run this program multiple times, then conceivably we could put different names in, different hours worked, different hourly rates, etc. every time. That should make sense to you. And since we have different inputs, we'd of course be producing different outputs. All right, so that's the first paragraph. Then, we are not only defining those global constants right here, we're going to use them in the program. All right, I mean, again, not to sound dumb, but why define those constants if you're not going to use them? They're just taking up space otherwise. So we will use them in this program. All right, finally, this program, you've actually used the if statement already. Whether you realize it or not, we use that if statement not in here, but we used that in our GUI example. Remember where for our exit button, we put the if statement in there that said basically if you click the yes button on there, end the program, otherwise don't end the program. Well, now we're going to put that in here. But I'm supposing, and I'm going to erase this right away, but I'm supposing a person typically works a 40-hour week. Okay? That's what I'm supposing. And if you work 40 hours, you don't get any overtime. If you work more than 40 hours, you get overtime. And I'm assuming that you're paid at time and 1/2. All right? Does all that make sense, telling that to people? I will tell you, because Rankin's real different. Rankin, the way that they actually set you up is you teach 3 classes a year. 3. And with a lot of instructors, they teach 1 class in fall, 1 class in spring, 1 class in summer. That's not a bad schedule. Like Paul Knott, who teaches in the afternoon, that's how he does it. He's got a class from I think about 5 to 9, Monday through Thursday, I think it is. No, it's 5 to 10, Monday through Thursday, and he does that spring, fall, and summer. That's not a bad gig when you think about it. Now with me, this is, I had 2 classes last semester and 2 classes this semester. Okay? So the way they do it, it's not considered overtime, but you get what's called overload. And I get a lump sum for teaching an extra class. Does that make sense? And if I had to teach one in summer, I'd get another lump sum. I wish they'd let me do that because I could always use the money, but they won't. That's just the way it works, and that's okay. All right? But the point is, what I'm telling you is, if we had Bob, all right, and Bob works 30 hours, and Bob makes $20 an hour, then Bob has made $600 for that week. Does that make sense? All right. Then we have Mary. And Mary works 50 hours. And Mary makes also $20 an hour. Well, she's got overtime coming. So Bob, we just did straight time. But Mary, we can figure out her regular pay, which would be the 40 hours she works times 20. That's $800, but that's just for her first 40 hours. But she worked 50 hours, and if we subtract from there the 40 hours, and we multiply that by her rate by 1.5, that's now 10 times 20 times 1.5. So that's 200 times 1.5, or 300. So 800 plus 300, that means Mary made $1,100. Does all that make sense? And $100 of the amount she made was overtime. All right? The reason I'm telling you that is that's what we're going to program into this. So we're going to ask the question, did the user input over 40 hours for the numbers worked? And if they did, we'll have to do this calculation. If they didn't, we'll do the other calculation. And that's basically, that's the type of logic that you would put into a computer program. All right? So that's what we're going to do. Again, sometimes putting it on the board like that, or putting it on screen or whatever, that makes it a little easier for people to understand it. So if we look at the constants that are in here, I'm not reading them to you. You can see there's 6 of them. You can see what they are. All of them are doubles because conceivably you could work part of an hour. You could, not everybody makes a dollar amount. It's on the dollar. If you say I can make $10 an hour or I can make $10.99, I'll take the $10.99. So they're all doubles. I do want you to realize 2 things. First, if I made these floats, which I could do, then I'd get an error here unless I put in either a big F or a little f. I could do that. Most programmers don't use those because it's kind of a pain in the butt. All right? I could also make this, get rid of that f. I could also make this a decimal. And if I made that, I'd have to put either a big M or a little m after that. That's one of the reasons I don't use decimal if I don't have to. All right? Now, just so you know, math with a computer is not an exact science. If you don't believe me, if you know how to write maybe more code than you've been shown so far, if you go in and you write a program, a computer program that does something like this. Put it on here. So if I were to write something along the lines of sum equals 0.1 plus 0.1 plus 0.1 plus 0.1 plus 0.1 plus, and I'm going to put these next 5 in there. All right, that's 1/10, 2/10, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10/10. You would think the answer you'd get would be 1.0. That's what I'd think. But computers don't do things in an exact science. You could get an answer if you printed out sum, it might be 1.0. More than likely, it'll be something like 1.000456, something like that. Or it might even be 0.999938, something like that. Right? And because computers don't do math in an exact way, and some languages are better at doing exact math than other languages are. C# is kind of in the middle. All right. There's a language that at the school I used to teach at, there was a guy who taught a class, and it was called data processing math. Information technology used to be referred to as data processing. So he taught this class, and it was all theory. And at the end of the class, you had to basically write a system where you could, like, somebody could put in their mortgage, and it would write an amortization program for them. Okay? He didn't care how you did it. He didn't care if you did an Excel spreadsheet, if you wrote it the C programming language, if you wrote it the COBOL programming language, if you wrote it in C#, if you wrote it in Java. He didn't care. But he wanted you to write it in one of those. Okay? So he was a COBOL guy. Don't worry about what COBOL is, but there actually is a point to this. He wrote this long program that was like 400 lines long. And it was very well done. And he had it right to the penny, because COBOL was that kind of language. I wrote it in C, and when I got done, it was off by like 3 cents. But my program took 40 lines as opposed to his 400. So sometimes you give up one thing to get another thing. And again, if you don't think that's a big thing, I remember I paid off my first car, and I was proud of myself. All right, I bought it new. My dad co-signed, but never paid a frickin' cent for anything. All right, I paid it off, and I'm like, my title isn't coming. My title isn't coming. My title isn't coming. So I get a note from the bank. There was an error on my bill, and I owed them 3 cents, which I thought was hilarious because at the time it wasn't that expensive, but it was on a postcard that at the time I think that stamps were like 9 cents. So they spent 9 cents to give me a message that I owed them 3 cents. All right, and I thought, boy, are they asses? They're asses. So I thought, well, I can be an ass. So I sent them a check for 3 cents. All right, and it worked. You know, I got my thing back. But the point is, if I'd used another language, you might not have had that error. And I just want you to realize that math in a computer is not an exact science. All right. So we've got main, we've got our first name, we've got our last name, our hours. Well, if you notice, I said one of the other things we're going to add in here is a Boolean variable. A Boolean variable can only have a value of true or false. That's it. All right. So let's come in here. We got the first name, the last name. Let's put it right in here. And we'll type bool is union. And I'm going to set that equal to false. All right. When you do stuff like this, you can make one of two assumptions. You can either you can assume the best or the worst. I don't know how you'd even, that's not a really well put, but let me type this in and then I'll explain to you what I mean. Doesn't have to be capitalized, does it? The first thing to look at in here, the first thing for you to look at in here is, and it's not mandatory, but very often programmers start Boolean variables with the word is. Is union means, yeah, you're a union member, or no, you're not a union member. All right, I've said this before, people sometimes laugh, it's not a joke. Did you ever hear that? Hey, are you pregnant? Kind of. Well, no, you're pregnant or you're not pregnant, right? The computer has no gray area. So if I say is union, there's only two possible values, true or false. That's the only thing that's acceptable. Notice if I come in here and I put in 37, I get an error because it's telling me when I mouse over it, it says that represents a 32-bit integer. It can't implicitly, meaning the computer, remember implicit is the computer can't convert an int to a bool. It doesn't know how to do that. Now, in some programming languages, you can say 0, and 0 can be used for false, and 1 can be used for true. This isn't one of those languages. All right? So we've got to put in here either true or false. So we can sit there and say, okay, we can assume the best, that everybody who works for our place is union, and make it true, and it be proven false, or we can assume that nobody's union and have them prove it true. You understand the difference? You can put either one in there. It's up to you. What the system typically does is if you don't initialize a Boolean, almost every programming language that I know of initializes it to false if you don't do so. All right? So we've got this. We get the squigglies, and it just says, hey, you've got this variable. You've declared it. You've assigned it a value, but you aren't doing squat with it. Okay? So we've got that right for our first name, that right for our last name. So I'm going to copy that right for our last name, and I'm going to paste it in again, and I'm going to change this to union status. Now, I'm also going to put true or false. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. But it's going to make it easier for the person to understand. Now notice, bless you, notice again, I can't say read line. Read line is expecting a string. We went through this stuff yesterday. But now we can say here, convert dot to, notice there's a to Boolean. That's what we want. So that's the code we want. I'll give you a second to put that in. So we both added our Boolean variable, and now we're allowing you to read in. Okay? When you write a write statement like any of these write statements, oftentimes they're called prompting writes because I'm prompting. I'm telling you to enter your first name. I'm telling you to enter your last name. Okay? Even a little kid, if I walked up to a kid who was maybe 4 or 5 and I said, "What's your name?" Or if I said, "What's your first name?" they'd probably know. If I said, "What's your last name?" they'd probably know. But we're putting a little bit more in our prompt here. We can't account for human stupidity. If we say, "What's your union status?" and they type in Ralph, the program's going to blow up, right? Because it's going to try to take Ralph and convert it to a Boolean which only has true and false. So if you look up on the screen here, you don't have to do this yet, but I'm going to save and I'm going to run this. I just want you to see it. So Jeff, Scott, again, I forgot the last paren, but that's no big thing. Notice if I put true here, everything's cool. Boom. I'm not printing it out yet, but you can see that. All right? If I run it again, let me put that parenthesis in here. All right, so if I run it again and do the same thing, but put false, that's fine too. The program didn't blow up. I'll add that to my output in just a minute. But if I run it again, and I put hello, boom, the program blows up. Because it can't do the conversion from a string to a Boolean. Because the only thing that Boolean will represent will be true or false. All right? And again, if I want to close that, I just click the X right here, and then I click this red square, and boom, I'm back to my program. All right? So we'll make some changes to this in just a minute. But I'm just adding things very, very, very incrementally. All right? Let's go down and do one more thing, and then we're going to go start making some changes to this. That is, let's come down to the bottom where we're printing everything out here, and let's print out the union status. All right, so I added this line that you see here in blue. What we're doing now will be similar to your second test that you take, because by that time we'll have talked about if statements and loops, etc. Okay? If you don't like that, if you say, why'd you write stat, then write status. It really and truly does not matter. Again, we're not turning this in or anything like that, so whatever the way you do it is fine. So you'll notice now, when I save this and run it again, now it's giving me my union status. And it is expecting you to put it in as false in lowercase. But notice it prints it as false in uppercase. All right? Now, I'm asking, because I don't know, anything we just did or anything we've done earlier in this program, is there anything that doesn't make sense? This is your time to ask. If something is like, what did you do there? I don't get it. This one? This says take that value that we're putting in there for hours. Everything that we print out on the screen is a string. All right, so we're telling it to convert it to a string, and we're telling it we want it to have 2 decimal places. That means a floating point of 2 places. This here means currency. That means put the dollars and cents in, and a comma if we need them. I didn't put that for hours worked, because if I say how many hours did you work, and you work 40, it won't be $40.00. It'll be 40.00. All right? Any other questions? Anything that doesn't make sense? All right? We're going to do 2 things, and then we'll be done with this program. First thing we're going to do is right here, we're going to change this so we can do overtime. If you remember before, when I ran this, and I said we have Mary Jones, and she worked, let's say she's not a union member, and she works 50 hours, it makes $20 an hour, she does not get any overtime currently. All right, but she did work 40 hours or more hours where she's entitled to overtime. So we're going to change this. That's just our straight time calculation. But we're going to do an overtime calculation as well. So that is the first thing that we're going to do. All right? Then we're going to say, you know what? What we've done in here, there's not like there's really a lot wrong with it, but we're not doing any validation. So we're going to come in and we're going to validate everything. Did you hear what I said? And when we validate it, our program is going to start getting long. And rather than having a main that's going to be really huge like this, we're going to take every one of these things that we ask and put it in its own routine. All right? It's just like, again, it's like if you say, what do you do? Well, I'm here to clean the house. Well, I'm saying, okay, I've got 10 rooms in my house, so I'm going to give you instructions on how to clean each of them. So each one of those 10 rooms is going to have its own routine. Okay? For instance, I might tell you that I want you to mop the floor. in the kitchen because my kitchen, let's say, is like this. Okay? But if you go in the living room, it's carpeting. I don't want you to mop that. You know, stuff like that should just make sense. So that's what we're going to do. That's called modularizing your program. Okay? So that's what we're going to do in a minute. So we're going to come down here where we've got this here, and we're going to type in here, calculate gross pay giving overtime if earned. Okay? If not if earner, if earned. So if you work more than 40 hours, you get overtime. And you get overtime at the overtime rate. Okay? Make sense? Please look up on the screen for a second here. There are companies that if you work more than 35 hours a week, you get overtime. Okay? So we made that a constant because later, maybe we want to change that. Maybe we want to make that greater, or maybe we want to make that less. Does that make sense? So now we only have to change it there, and every place down below we use max non-OT, it's automatically changed. That's why you use a constant. All right? In the same way, we may decide at a later time that, you know what? If somebody's dumb enough, we'll let them work 120 hours. When you think about it, if this is a weekly payroll, the biggest number we could put in there, conceivably, is 168, right? There's 168 hours in a week. So if the person lived at the place they were working at, you know, but we're not going to change that. But again, conceivably, we could. Over time, that number might have to get higher. We don't know. All right. So we're coming down here, and we're going to calculate our gross pay. So what we want to say is if, now don't type this because I want you to see this. We could do this. I'm going to make a change to this in a second. We could do exactly what I'm showing you right now. Whoops. That's correct. But we already created a constant that we're using for 40 hours. So we shouldn't use the number 40. We should put here that. So that's the first part of the calculation. That you can type in. All right, now I'm going to put a comment here. Just going to say straight time, i.e. no OT earned. So they worked less than or equal to 40 hours. All right. I'm thinking this is between this program and the next one we do, it's going to take most of the rest of the period. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is tomorrow, I'm going to give you lab for the entire period. And I'll let you know for chapters 1 and 2 what you have to work on and submit. I'll do that by the end of class. Then you'll have plenty of time to work on that. Yes?
When is the chapter 2 written test?
The question is, when is the chapter 2 written test? It's up to you. And what I mean is, never is not an option. But it's up to you, and you can either do it tomorrow or you can do it Friday before the other test. Either way. So I'll ask that at the end of class. And the class will vote. There's 8 of you. I guess I break ties. I don't want to, but we'll see. What's that? We can flip a coin. That's fine too. All right. Does that calculation make sense? Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the calculation for the overtime. You can type it in. But if you want to, you can break it up into steps. There's all sorts of ways you can do this. Okay, so I'm going to put an else statement here. And I'm going to put a comment right here that says overtime earned. Okay? And I'm going to say, first we have to remember, we have to do their straight time. So we're going to start by saying max non-OT times rate. That's their first 40 hours. That's what they made for their first 40 hours of pay. and we want to add to that. I'm going to put this on another line, because otherwise it's just going to get too long. All right? And I'm going to put here hours minus max non-OT times rate times OT rate. And I probably have too many or not enough parens in here, so I'll have to look at that. I think it says I need one more there. Wasn't that OT rate? Isn't that what we called it? We didn't give it an OT rate. I'm sorry. Please go up to your constants here. All right, let's add another constant rather. Const double OT rate equals 1.5. Again, it's kind of a standard thing in most companies that when you give overtime, it's time and 1/2. Not every place is like that. Some places, I used to work at a place that gave double time on Sundays. All right? I loved working Sundays. I'm like, wow, you missed Packer games. I didn't give a damn. Because at the time I was making $10 an hour and I was about 20. You give me $20 an hour, I'll do almost anything for you when I'm 20 years old. All right? So, everybody has that? You all put this constant in, correct? All right, so let's go down here. Now it'll make more sense. Now I don't get the error for OT rate. And did I have too many? Is that right? So what doesn't it like? Only assignment, yeah, I have to be using this as a state. Oh, my fault. Gross pay equals. That would probably help, wouldn't it? So that's it. And if you go, I don't get that. That's the exact same calculation I put on the board before. That's why I did it that way. So we don't need this gross pay statement that's down here anymore. So if they work less than or 40 or equal to 40 hours, they get straight time. Otherwise, they get overtime. Now, a real easy way to look at this is like this. Let's do it even easier in the example we used before. They work 50 hours. They make $10 an hour. Okay? If there was only straight time, it would be 50 times 10. They'd make 500. They'd make no overtime. But since there's overtime, their first 40 hours that they work, which is, their max non-OT, their first 40 hours they work, that's their straight time pay, that's 400. But they also worked 50 minus 40, which is 10, times 10 times 1.5. So that is 10 times 10 times 1.5, that's 100 times 1.5, or 150. So 400 plus 150, if our calculation is correct, a person who works 50 hours at $10 an hour should make $550. Does that make sense? I just did that calculation for you before we put this in here, and that person made $500 because we didn't have an overtime calculation yet. All right? So we're going to put in that overtime calculation now. If you've got all that stuff in, click your double disk icon to do a save all, and click your start button right here, and let's try it. And indeed, that person now makes $550. Okay? And again, this may not sound like that big a thing to you, but if you're telling me that I'm going to get overtime for everything I work that's over 40, and I work more than 40, and you don't give me overtime, I'll let you know. All right? I used to work at a food store, and I'm not making this up. I would imagine that 90% of the old women that were the checkers there that I worked with are dead. All right? But there was one woman, she'd be all red in her face, and I'd go, her name was Ginny. I'd say, Ginny, what's wrong? I got my check today. Yeah? they shorted me by 3 cents. She did it every single week. She figured out everything. The lady was brilliant. You know, high school student, but had a good math mind. She sat there and complained. Guess what? They gave her 3 cents. Probably because it was a lot easier to do that and shut her up. All right? But is there anything that we've just done that doesn't make sense to you? Is there anything about this calculation that doesn't make sense to you? Let's suppose that you're looking at this, okay, and it's just too hard for you to understand, okay? I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do this. I don't want you to do this, but I'm just telling you this is what we could do. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to add 2 more variables. Double, and I'm going to call it straight pay, and I'm going to set that equal to 0.0, and I'm going to have double overtime pay, and I'm going to set that equal to 0.0. All right? You don't have to do this, but this is what I'm trying to show you. I could have come down then and done this. I'm going to just copy these 2 lines here. All right? Now I could have said straight pay equals 40 times that. That's our regular hours. Overtime pay equals, and then I could have put in, I don't know, for example, I could have just put in this. All right. Then I could have come down here and said the gross pay is equal to the straight pay plus the overtime pay times the rate times the OT rate. Now that's a little bit easier to read. Okay? I could have even done this. I could have grabbed all this stuff right there and put that in here. Just like that. Then I could have said that the straight pay is equal to this right here. See the difference? Sometimes with people, it's very hard for them to understand. They look at a calculation like this one right here, and it's just too much for them to wrap their heads around. If that's you, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's just that it's easier for you to look at this than it is this. This, of course, this will take more time to actually execute than this. But I will tell you that if, for example, if I'm writing a payroll program, and I don't care if I've got 1 million people worldwide that work for me, if I run a payroll program with this, even if it takes 2 hours, and let's say here I can do it and it takes 10 minutes less, who cares? It's a flippin' payroll program. So again, I want you to be right now coding for understandability. So if this is easier for you to understand than this is, then do it that way. Does that make sense? All right, we all have our little quirks and our little things that we work with that something is easier to use than something else is, whatever it happens to be. All right? I'm going to leave it like this. All right. Now, when you look at this, and we go back, we're going to take a break at 10 o'clock, so give me 6 minutes, please. If we look at this, we now have used max non-OT. We've now used OT rate. We've now used both those. We haven't used min hours or max hours. We haven't used min rate or max rate. We're going to do those, okay? And we'll do that after the break, but I'm just going to show it to you right now. Don't worry about keying it in. We'll do that right after the break. I'd rather have you watch for a second, okay? Now, I'm going to do this. It says, please enter your hours worked. All right, I'm going to put it in again in just a second. Now I'm going to say while hours is less than the minimum hours. Again, you'll have plenty of time to type this in. Or hours is greater than the maximum hours. Well, that's an error condition, because I put in a value that's out of range. I can handle that in a lot of different ways. All right? I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to tell you to do it again. See that? All right? So, when I save this, and again, we're going to do this right after the break, but notice now, Jeff, Scott, true, hours worked, 555. Just asks you to do it again. -5. It asks you to do it again. I'm starting to show you input validation. All right? It's not true, because if I put true validation, DDD, program blows up. We'll fix that at a later time. All right? But this is what I wanted to show you in this example. So I'm going to do this one. Then, because I'm not a big fan of typing when I don't have to, all right, I'm going to come in for the hourly rate, and I'm going to do the same thing. But this will say while rate is less than min rate, hours is less than min rate. So that has to be rate also here. And again, I will ask you to do it again. Now I've got it set that it's doing some validation, all right? And I'm doing it, it's checking my hours to make sure it's within range, and it'll be checking my rate to make sure that it's within range. Does that make sense? We'll do that after the break. It's 9:57. Let's come back at about 10:12, please.